This episode is brought to you by JT Clothiers. Hi, I'm Chad Hennings, and this is Forces of Character podcast. My guest today, Daron Babcock. Daron was a former knuckle dragger just like me. He was a wrestler from the University of Oklahoma, grew up in the Panhandle outside Amarillo, went on to be a businessman, very successful entrepreneur, went through some significant trials in his life, which we'll get into here in just his life's journey, but came out kind of rebirthed on a pathway that has led him to realizing that the significance in life is not serving yourself, but it's serving others. And his story is going to motivate you and it's going to inspire you. And with that, I'm going to quit talking and we're going to hear from Daron. Daron, thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
You know, I've heard your story years ago when you spoke at Wingman, and was inspired and was motivated to want to go out and to serve and to make an impact in our community. But before we get into that part of your life, let's kind of back up and lay the foundation. Let's talk about, growing up in Amarillo. Who were some of your early influences and those individuals that had an impact on you early on in your journey?
Well, for me, the most positive impacts came from inside my family. I have a wonderful family, sister and parents that are amazing. And then I was blessed with two sets of grandparents that were some of the wisest people I've ever known. And they poured that wisdom into me. A lot of it I didn't even understand at the time, but it resonated, and later in life it's like, oh, that's what they meant by that. But I think those were the most significant early influences. I struggled in school. I am old, so I kind of was in the generation before they started diagnosing with kids with everything that maybe isn't normal about you. You have a diagnosis with it, but I'm pretty sure I'm really high strung and my mind runs 1,000 miles an hour and can't stay focused. So I probably have some kind of attention deficit, something. And I struggled in school and I had a hard time from the teacher side, but for me, sports was another area where coaches, again, really did a lot around building you up as a person and character development that really is necessary in athletics.
I can empathize. I was one of those high-strung kids, grew up on a farm, also where you worked on your grandparents' farm too, so you had that blue-collar work ethic, but that exuberance and energy, I think that's just young men to begin with. We need to allow them and not force young men to have to sit in a classroom,
have somebody talk at you,
hands on their knees and speak at them all day. They need to be out running around.
That's not for me.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's just it, and not to label somebody with ADD. I think that's just being an exuberant, highly energetic young guy.
Yeah.
But your coaches impact, your parents, your family instilled in you that basis, and I love that because it's that aspect of athletics too. I think that's the greatest leadership laboratory that there is on learning perseverance, commitment, overcoming obstacles. How to work well with others, how to listen to others. Because even wrestling, which was your sport, it is a team sport.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that transition then from Amarillo to Norman, Oklahoma, at the University of Oklahoma as a wrestler. What happened? How'd that come about?
Yeah, the three things that resonate me from growing up in Amarillo is that my family's very blue collar. My dad's the first one in our family to go to college, and work ethic was something that was very important in our family. And so we always went to church. My parents were strong believers, and so that was something that they tried to instill in us. Character was the second, and work ethic was the third. And I think I gravitated towards the third and didn't do very well in the character or faith part of it. And I get to the University of Oklahoma, and I'll never forget our coach. We were the top-ranked team in the country my freshman year. We had two Olympians come back that had won gold medals in the '84 Olympics, and we had one of the largest recruiting classes we'd ever had. And he gave us this talk and said, look, if you look around the room, we've had however many thousands of people come through this program, and yet there's only this many pictures on the wall. And let me tell you, of the people sitting in this room, only 3 of you are going to make it on that wall. The rest of you, there's a smaller amount that's going to make the team and actually start. And the rest of you are either going to get caught up in the fun that is college. Maybe you've already reached your full potential and you have no more growth left in you. You're going to be distracted by other things. And he handed out these shirts with Oklahoma Wrestling on the front, and on the back it said, "If it is to be, it's up to me." And like that's the first time I felt like I belonged in that room, because that's what I've been told my whole life. Like, whatever you work for, you can get if you're willing to pay the price to get what you want. And so that was dangerous for me, because I only took a third of the lessons they taught me, was the work ethic side. And if you separate work ethic from character and faith, I think it's a formula for disaster. And so that leads to kind of some of the breakdowns that I had later in life, because my identity was tied up in my accomplishments.
In performance. I can relate. You bet. And I think a lot of men can relate with that, because what you do does not define who you are, but so many times that's how we keep score.
Yep.
How we measure against each other is, okay, how much money you make.
Yep.
What have you been able to accomplish? Or the antithesis of that, which we'll get into, what mistakes have you made in your life that are going to define you?
Yep.
So, you're wrestling in Oklahoma, probably your tenacity and your work ethic is probably how you made it with your future bride that you met there at Oklahoma. Just kind of maybe share a little bit of that story. I heard you guys were on a run and running through the sorority row or whatnot.
Yeah. It's funny that when I was at OU, the athletic facilities were all separate from the main campus. And so we didn't get to we didn't even really see what real college life was like. And when we did well, our coaches thought we were doing well, they would take us on a long run, and they would leave us at the end of the run in the middle of the campus. And it was like, oh, like this is a whole other world that we don't get to see. And so we'd finish this long run, and we're in the middle of this campus, and we're walking through, and all the pretty girls and people are walking out of whatever it was they were doing, and happened to walk by this one building, and there were windows at the ground level that were windows to a basement. And this room was filled with girls. And it's like, let's go in, right? And so we go busted into the room where these girls were. And my mom had called me and said, hey, some family friends of ours, we just found out their daughter's a freshman at OU too. I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, here's her number. You should give her a call. Well, her family did the same. And we both did what you'd think we probably did. We both threw them away and forgot about it. And then when I got into that basement, they said that was the pledge class for Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority. And I remembered my mom saying she was a Kappa pledge. So I just said, which one of you is Marcy Knight? And they all kind of giggled and said, she's skipping tonight. And so that started this journey. They told her that I was asking about her. The next day after practice, I came out of the dorm after having our meal, and her and a couple of her friends were in our hallway, which was forbidden. We weren't supposed to have anybody that wasn't an athlete in the athletic dorms. And we met that night and went on our first date, and the rest is history.
Wow. So you dated all throughout college then?
Yes, sir.
And ended up getting married.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that transition then from, what'd you do next after graduation? You have that work ethic, you got the degree, now what?
Well, I went to work for a company called Scott Paper Company. It doesn't exist anymore. It was acquired by Kimberly Clark. But I went to work for Scott Paper Company, and it was an amazing organization, learned a lot. And I had to go through an internship or an apprenticeship first. And I kept telling them I had this arrogance. And I was like, you're wasting your time. You should just put me out there and let me go. And so it was supposed to be a year-long apprenticeship, and I think after 3 months, they got tired of me complaining and sent me out to the market, and I failed. I couldn't do anything. It was embarrassing. My first boss was a former professional baseball player, and so he talked to us like a coach would talk to other players. It was pretty aggressive. And I'll never forget the first meeting we had. He's like, look, nobody would ever have to fire me. If I can't get the job done, I'd be the first one to man up and admit it and turn in my badge and my keys and go on. And some of you need to look yourselves in the mirror. And I think he's talking directly at me. And so at lunch we broke, and I was like, man, I get it. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm trying, but I'm just failing. And he's like, I wasn't talking about you at all. And I was so surprised because I felt like I was such a failure. And he really spent time helping me understand how to translate the lessons I learned in sports to business. And I was trying to do two separate things instead of learning how to blend those two, and really transformed my understanding of business and how to apply those lessons, and started really becoming much more successful than I was before.
That's very interesting. I wrestled in high school, and I think wrestlers are some of the most aggressive, most dedicated athletes, particularly because you're cutting weight, and just the amount of physical exertion of energy they have to go through. It's very tasking.
Yes.
And not only that, just the mental toughness piece of that. What lessons can you share that we're able to translate, that you were able to translate from that experience on the mat to then now working?
Yeah, well,
working as a professional.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is, as an athlete, growing up in early athletics, it was always, who are you competing against? And when you get to higher levels, they shifted that and said, it's not who you're competing against, your competition's yourself. And it's how do you study yourself and get better every day? And when you have the confidence of doing the best that you can, you go out there and it doesn't matter who your competition is, right? It's just about getting better every day. And I think when I got into business, it was like I was looking at the outcome and saying, that didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work. And it started getting in my mind that I was failing. Instead of saying, gosh, when I failed on the mat, what did we do? We came back and we watched film. I learned specifically what I did that didn't work. And then we went out and worked on it. And I tried not to make that same mistake next time. And then you gradually, day after day after day, get better. And I was not applying that perseverance or trying to understand what wasn't working so that I could specifically address that and go back and not make that same mistake twice.
I appreciate that. My son has always told me, like, you do you. That was the saying, you do you, concentrate on that. And I appreciate that so much, and I've utilized those same lessons too when flying jets, evaluate the film, look back, how can you improve, it's one of those universal truths, improve your own skill set first before, trying to go out and to achieve a certain particular outcome.
Yeah.
So you're at Scott Paper Company, you start to have success. I believe there was an acquisition there that
pretty famous
acquired.
Yes.
Yeah. Just continue to share your story and the progression, eventually wanting to get to how you made it to Oregon.
Yeah, we had an opportunity to get promoted to go to Manhattan, which was one of the unique opportunities within Scott Paper Company where you got to jump several rungs on the ladder. Not many people made it out of that, but if you did, you were kind of on the fast track to executive leadership. And so we were young, excited, newly married, and I was like, what a great opportunity to explore. It was so hard of an environment that they limited it to just 2 years. And so what can you make of yourself in 2 years? And it was like, you either make it or you don't. And so I went a couple of trips to New York and explored. My wife went up there with me. We were all excited, and I came home from my third trip, and she's like, we need to talk. I was like, what's going on? She's like, I'm pregnant. And all of a sudden then this excitement of being young and having no responsibilities except to each other shifted. And we started thinking about it, and as if we take that trajectory, we're going to wind up living in LA, Chicago, New York. Like, that's where the economic opportunities are. That's where the leaders will be. And is that really where we want to start our family? And so we had to have a course correction. And what I've learned is that really the gifts that God has given me, I'm an entrepreneur. It's how I think. It's what I do. And so we stepped out and worked for a smaller company for a guy that owned it, that let me come in and run it for him. But he taught me lessons along the way, preparing me for my entrepreneurial journey. And did that for about 5 years, and then moved to the Pacific Northwest and started a company that we thought would be what we would apply our skills and talents to for the rest of our lives.
I'm just thinking of the humility, one, to realize, you're a driven individual. You're a type A alpha, you're a collegiate wrestler wanting to compete. Where you're on the fast track, they think very highly of you that you can have this success monetarily, socially. And then to be able to listen to your bride and say, we got to be on the same page, that takes not many guys, I would think, in today's times would do that, because they're still continuing to chase their version of what success is.
Yeah.
So that's I compliment you on
that point, at that time in history, at least within our culture, if you turned down an opportunity like that, you weren't climbing anymore.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just that we turned it down, but I had to leave and go start something else. And so it was a big decision for us at that point in our lives.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, I can relate.
Yeah.
Taking those chances in the entrepreneur. So, what's this business that you started in the Pacific Northwest?
So we had the idea that we wanted to develop a commercial real estate business, and the way that we were going to do that is we partnered with a local franchise company out of Texas called Schlotzsky's. And our idea, there were no Schlotzsky's in Oregon, so we wanted to bring them to Oregon, and we're going to use those stores to generate revenue and acquire commercial real estate. And if we could run those restaurants profitably for 10 years, all the debt would be paid off, and then we could transition from doing commercial real estate and restaurant business just into commercial real estate. So that was our vision and plan, and that's what we endeavored to do.
Then what happens?
It was going really well, actually. And then, when you do a startup like that, you do everything, and it's really exhausting. And we hadn't taken a day off in 2 years. And we finally got to a place where it was stabilized enough we could do it. And we decided we were going to go on a surfing trip all the way from Portland, Oregon down to Baja, California, and back again. And so before we had left, my wife started complaining that she had this sore on her tongue, like an ulcer. Not a big deal. It's not comfortable, but it's not a big deal. She wrestled with it long enough and it didn't go away that she went to the doctor. They did a biopsy on it, said it's no problem. It's probably diet. We were both athletic, and I didn't get to eat for 5 years. So I will eat anything that doesn't eat me first. And so we love to eat. And we wouldn't stick to the diet. And it seemed there was this natural ebb and flow to that place on her tongue that didn't coincide with the diet. And then it started getting worse. So she's like, I'm going to stick to this diet. And that didn't work. So she goes back and gets another biopsy right before we go on this surfing trip. And I'll never forget, this was back when you had answering machines. We came back and started going through and playing your voice messages. And there was a message from the doctor saying, we got the results back. We need you to come in and see us right away. So I'm 31 years old at the time. She's 29. And you kind of still think you're invincible. You go to the doctor and they tell us it's cancer. It's like, okay, what do we need to do? It just doesn't, the magnitude of it, I don't think we understood. And we started this journey of trying to catch up to it. And the first surgery she had, part of it was removing a third of her tongue and then doing what they call a neck dissection to take some lymph nodes out to check and see if it had metastasized. And it came back and it had already spread. And so with this, cancer's diverse and there's lots of different kinds of them, but with this particular kind, once it spreads, it's really hard to catch up to. So for 2 years, she went through just, the 3 ways you treat cancer is you poison it, you burn it, and you cut it. And none of that's fun. And so she suffered pretty severely for those 2 years. And 2 years from the date of her diagnosis, she passed away. So I think I'm 32 at the time. We had 2 boys that were 6 and 7. I thought I was the king of the world, which was an illusion, but I believed that. Had no faith component to my life. I was always raised that men were supposed to be strong and never to let anything affect us because we needed to be there for others. And so my whole life, when I'd encountered hardships, I just stuffed it down and kept going. And at that point, it tipped me over.
So you're trying to cowboy up.
Yeah.
Did you have any relationships, probably no male relationships where you could, or wingmen, as we talked about,
no.
that you could go talk to? So what happened with your journey?
Well, I started showing symptoms that I didn't understand at the time, but I lost the appetite for life. So first thing is, we had a house full of people all the time trying to help us navigate through that journey. And when she passed away, it's like, I want everybody to go home. I want everything that has to do with cancer, all the stuff and the equipment and stuff that comes in, I want it all out of the house. And then I just disassociated. And I think isolation is one of the early indicators of a breakdown. Usually addiction, but all kinds of other things. I didn't understand that, but I just started isolating myself in the house. I didn't have the desire to even go down the hill to get our mail. Like, everything seemed to be really hard. And, my friends, the few friends I had there were concerned about me and kept trying to just come get me and take me out of the house. But, as a former wrestler in that era, that was the time where the whole mixed martial arts thing started emerging. And if you're a wrestler, you either go to the Olympics or nothing else, but there's no professionalism of wrestling that's athletic. And so this new thing emerged. So all my friends were involved in some form or fashion in this new thing that started up. So it was a pretty rough group of people. And so the first time I agreed to go out with them, we wound up in a bar, and I don't even remember what happened, but in the first 5 minutes we were there, we got in a fight. And it's the first time that pain that I was feeling inside that I couldn't get away from or couldn't deal with left for just a few minutes. And I would do anything to feel that release of that pain I was carrying. And so I found a way to self-medicate. Unfortunately, it was by hurting other people, and started this pattern of me going out and just trying to find trouble so that I could feel a relief from this pain. And one particular night we went and got in another fight, and the police came, and I jumped in a car with some people I didn't know to get away, and they took me back to their apartment, and they were running cocaine up and down the West Coast. And so I'd never done drugs before, but that night did a line of cocaine. I didn't care. I didn't care at that point. And it's another thing where I didn't feel that pain anymore. So now I don't have to hurt people. I felt like this was better, and became hooked on that very, very quickly. And it just started this really dark, very dark spiral where, I'll never forget taking my kids. I was really having a bad day on a Saturday. I was really, really hurting and struggling. I was like, maybe if I go surf, I'll feel better. So I took the boys out to the beach, and there's a big sand hill that they used to climb up, and then it'd take 30 minutes for them to climb up that hill, and then they would just go sailing down it on a piece of cardboard. It'd repeat the process. And I remember paddling out that day, and I just wanted to keep going. My kids are behind my kids are on this hill behind me. And I kept looking back at them, but it was this really scary time where the tug of just going out and not existing was so much stronger than my desire to go back.
Wow. So have you hit rock bottom yet?
I think
at that point in time.
I think I had been at rock bottom for a while. Yeah.
So what was the progression or the stimulus that caused you to then realize I can't do this? I can't continue like this for yourself or for your boys.
Unfortunately, it wasn't me. I think that's one of the things about addiction is I can look back and say, that's not me. And I think for people that are struggling with addiction, or people that have people they care about that are struggling with addiction, in the midst of that, you're not talking to that person. You're talking to that thing.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have the capacity to even understand what was, I wasn't in a place to even rationally make those kind of decisions or conversations with myself. But I had people that didn't quit on me. People that believed in me, that when they learned about the condition I was in, would not let me go.
Who are these folks?
My parents, my in-laws, and some of my former teammates and coworkers. And they loved me the right way. They cared about me enough that they wouldn't enable me, which is the hardest thing to do, because a lot of times we have this illusion that love is caring for somebody in their pain so much that you'll help them out of it. And in easing that pain and making it easier on them, you're actually making it easier for them to stay in their darkness and in their addiction. And so they loved me well. They didn't cut me any slack. And so that opened the door. And I think when I got to rehab, I had this encounter with a living God that was real and undeniable. And that crack in the door that my friends and family opened up was kicked down by my encounter with Jesus Christ.
So out of rehab then what, you have this, I'm assuming, a new outlook on life, a rebirth.
Yeah.
A phoenix rising out of the ashes.
Yeah.
What was your vision, your outlook, your purpose? Where do you want to take it thereafter?
This is the strange thing, Chad, is that I grew up in the church, but I never bought into it. And so in rehab, the day I met with a spiritual counselor, she challenged me with some questions that I couldn't answer, and I couldn't get them out of my head. And so 2 days I'm wrestling with these questions that she gave me. And the second night, I just remember, I can't find my way out of this. Like, I've done so much destruction that I don't know that I can recover and rebuild it. And so I fell to my knees and I just said, God, I don't know if you're real or not, but if you are, I quit. It's not the kind of prayer they teach you in church or anything.
Yeah.
I don't know who God is. I don't know who it is I'm talking to. And I had this, I don't know how to describe it. I get emotional still to this day talking about it. But I had this peace and joy that overcame me that it has no explanation for it. I'm in rehab. I've done damage to everything and everyone I've ever cared about. And somehow, with a little 10-second prayer, something came over me that changed me. And I'm like, I don't know who that God is, and I don't know what it means to quit. So it began this journey of who is God? Who did I surrender to? And what does it mean to quit and serve that God? And I was in Oregon, and so we started going. I was convinced it wasn't the God of the Bible because I'd experienced that. So we go to this church that's like this all pathways thing. Like if you had a piece of wisdom, they'd let you get up and talk about it. But they also taught out of the Bible some. And I remember going home after they taught out of the Bible, and I read the book of Matthew for the first time. And for the first time, I actually heard, you know, I knew the stories and all that, but it was, I got it. It wasn't.
Took on new meaning. Yeah.
I had new eyes and ears. Like I saw it and heard it and ingested it in a different way than I was ever able to before.
Just out of curiosity, what were those questions that spiritual counselor asked you that you couldn't get through?
Yeah, I don't remember all of them, but the big one was, you know, do you think that God did this to you? And I was like, I don't believe in God. And she's like, what would need to be true for you to believe? I was like, I don't know. And I start wrestling with this of going back through my childhood and thinking about what it was that I experienced growing up in church all the time. What else is out there? And I needed something to believe in, but I didn't know what it was. And so all this stuff is filtering through my mind and just coming up with more questions, which led to this kind of, I don't find a path out of this. So when I come to the end of myself, I just surrendered and said, if something's out there,
I'm yours.
I'm yours.
You know, and that's I kind of have come to a similar conclusion that our identity is truly based on what is our view of God and who is God to us. We can maybe get more on that later, but you get out of rehab, got to earn a living. Mm-hmm. You're in Oregon, you're kind of processing out. I mean, you went through this church. I mean, you read the book of Matthew now. You're on the right trajectory. Mm-hmm. What happens next? For over 50 years, JT Clothiers has been a respected family-owned clothing store for men and ladies in Denton, Texas. Whether you're looking for the perfect suit, an elegant top, or unique accessories, JT's offers a personalized shopping experience. The staff not only remembers your name, but also takes the time to understand your style, ensuring you always walk out with something you love. JT Clothiers carries world-class brands from around the globe, bringing you the best in fashion from far and wide. Whether you're shopping for work, play, or something in between, they got you covered. Conveniently located on the corner of Oak and Elm in historic downtown Denton, JT Clothiers is a must-visit destination. Stop by, support local, and let them know you came from Forces of Character podcast to receive 10% off your first purchase. Head over to JT Clothiers today, where timeless style meets personalized service.
Well, two things happened is, one, I shut my businesses down and put them up for sale. And so now I'm alone and at home, and none of the relationships I had before were healthy, and so I have none. And a guy that used to come into one of our Schlotsky stores every day was a Christian guy. He was always evangelizing to us, and I was like, listen, I would be polite and then ignore him. And when I got out of rehab, he called and he said, hey, we really want to know if you'd come to join this Bible study. We're studying this new book from John Eldredge called Wild at Heart, and it's an amazing book for men. And I was like, I'd love to, and I meant it, but I can't because I have left my children after they lost their mother. I'm not leaving them. They moved the Bible study to my house. So that was profound. Like, it was the first thing coming out as a new believer where Christians really showed me what it was like to love in that way. And the second thing, it took me you don't just quit a job and start another one. It took me 2 years to unravel from the business I was in. So I sat in the house for 2 years and all I had was God. And I think that was very intentional on his part in hindsight, because I couldn't lean on anybody or anything. The only thing I had was this relationship with him, and I just poured into that and felt like it put me on the fast track of maturing in a pretty condensed period of time, because it's what I solely focused on were my boys, selling the business, and my relationship with Christ.
So now you're discovering who you are, you're discovering your why, your purpose. Well, I think during this point in time. So after that 2-year period, what did you discover about yourself and kind of what your why was?
Well, there's a story that I heard all through Vacation Bible School, and it's one of these stories that's almost mythological, like in a comic book, of Jonah and the big fish, right? And I heard an Old Testament scholar, I believe his name is John Sailhammer, and he tells the story about Jonah and how he was supposed to go to Nineveh, but instead he was fleeing to Tarshish, and that was a year-long boat ride. So he had to be a man of means to be able to charter a boat for a year to get him there, and he loaded up everything he thought he had to have on this boat. And he's like, all of a sudden a storm hits, and immediately you start working through your inventory of what you really need and what you don't really need, because everything else started going overboard. Nothing made it to the ship that he thought he had to have it. But in the crisis, it has this way of filtering through what's really important, what's really not.
Yeah.
And he said, we spend so much of our lives praying to be rescued from storms and fish, when it's really storms and fish that are sent to rescue us. And I'll never forget that. And it was this letting go of things that I had attached to that are temporal, and attaching to things that are eternal and never can be taken away. And so my identity is not my athletic accomplishments, my business accomplishments, my family, my children, any of that stuff. My identity is now in who God says that I am. And he tells me that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, that I'm made in his image, that he has good works prepared in advance for me to do, that I'm an heir to his kingdom, that I'm more than a conqueror. And you can go on and on about who God tells us our identity is. And man, when you walk around in light of that, does that turn everything upside down?
Amen, amen.
Yeah.
So after the businesses are all wound down, you're in Oregon, what eventually brought you back to Texas?
Well, I knew that both my first wife's family and my family were from Texas. We were alone in Oregon. That wasn't good. It wasn't good that my kids only had me as family, so we knew we wanted to move back to Texas. What I found difficult is that trying to just go back and get a job, because now I'm a single father, I can't do a startup. I need just a job where I can work and come home and do the other responsibilities I have, is that I found it really hard to get a job. People don't like to hire entrepreneurs. We don't play within the lines. So I actually took a class for recovering entrepreneurs.
Is there such a thing?
There's definitely a thing. And one of the first assignments they gave us is like, make a list of all the people that have been really influential in your life and reach out to call them with no motive, but to connect. Well, I had isolated myself from everybody for years. One, because I didn't want to talk about, I got so tired of talking about to everybody what we were going through that I just exited that. And that first boss I told you about, that was the former professional baseball player that really helped unlock how to connect the gifts and skills that I learned in athletics and apply them to business, was on that list. And I called him, and 2 weeks later he called and said, hey, if I send you a plane ticket, would you fly out and meet me? So I flew out and meet him, and he offered me a a job, and so I reconnected with him, and that got me back started again.
Relationships.
Relationships.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
are you back in Texas at this time? I mean, that brought you back here, that job?
Yeah, to Dallas.
To Dallas?
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the job and kind of what entailed day to day? Were you having to travel? What were the?
Yeah. So we moved up to Frisco. My brother-in-law and his family lived there. We moved a block away from them. For some reason, every corporate opportunity I've ever had requires travel. Like I've never had a job where you walk into an office building. So it required travel. So it was really important that we were close to family, and they were so generous to be able to, when I was out of town, to let the boys stay with them. And it was, he offered me a job to run the healthcare part of their business. I knew nothing about it. I'd only been to the hospital to get stitches. And he told me something, and I shared this with him. He invited me to come speak at one of their annual meetings. And he told me, he's like, it doesn't matter, winners win. And so it's fascinating because a couple of years, maybe just a year later, there was an opportunity to lead all of the different verticals. And he didn't ever talk to me about that. He brought in other people and interviewed them. And the guy that he offered the job to didn't show up on day one. And so I wound up going to him and saying, like, why didn't you ever talk to me? And he's like, man, if you're in this, you're in the kitchen, you're in the fire. This is a really high pressure position. I was like, I thought you told me winners win. And so he gave me that opportunity to lead all of that and off to the races.
Off to the races, but at some time you paid a price.
Yes. Yeah.
And that price led to other decisions having to be made.
Yeah. And so that was a point in my maturation process where the old me started coming back. You know, talked about all the beauty of the identity that's true and real, that's everlasting, that can never be taken away. And yet I still have this part of my nature that's designed to perform and compete and to win. And I don't know that ever goes away, but it's always like this tug of war in my life where I try to keep it in balance, where that little red flag doesn't get too far to one side or the other.
Okay, and then eventually you decide that this isn't, you can't perform. Being away from the kids, you're on the road all the time. What eventually led you go down to South Dallas and to see that part of Bonton?
Well, there is no explanation outside of Providence, but the way that it happened was I was trying to find a way to apply my life to live out my faith authentically. And I had a hard time finding a way to do that in business. So I tried to explore how to weave that into my business career. I did short-term mission trips. Like I did all this stuff trying to find a way, and nothing ever felt like it was what resonated with me and what God really had for me. And I went to a coffee shop to have coffee with a friend of mine that was my accountability part. He was my wingman. And as soon as we sat down, he's like, I'm sorry, I've got to go. And I was like, well, why didn't you call and tell me? And he's like, because I was kind of hoping you'd go with me. I was like, where are you going? He's like, to Bonton. It's this neighborhood in South Dallas. A friend of his had done prison ministry, and one of the guys he was meeting with inside prison got released and happened to be from that neighborhood. And he was like a Barnabas. He was a big encourager. And I don't know if you spent much time in the inner city or not, but it's like this 5 times force of gravity circling around a drain, keeping everybody at the bottom. I mean, kids will get beat up for making good grades. Like nothing good is honored there. Everything bad is just reinforced, and it's this centrifugal force that keeps everything stuffed down. But we're human beings, right? And everybody wants to be believed in and encouraged and to know that they belong. And so my friend, being such a good encourager, other people started showing up, and that's what opened the door for me to get invited down there.
Just continue the story of what you...
I mean, I'll never forget, first thing he told me is like, I just need you to be aware, you can't drive into Bonton. We have to have people meet us at the floodgates to escort us in. That's not normal.
Maybe just describe a little bit to lay the foundation for this, of the next steps that you took in your life. You know, explain a little more about the history of Bonton. What is Bonton?
Bonton is a old freedmen's community. If you're not familiar with the word freedman, it's post-slavery during emancipation. This is something I can't imagine. What it would have been like to have been a slave and to have been freed but you couldn't go live in a community. You weren't welcome to live where other people lived. And so there were settlements that started to emerge, usually in the most undesirable places. Bonton is a place on the Trinity River, surrounded by a highway, a railroad, and a river. So it was isolated, and the river would flood every spring when the spring rains would come. And so being a floodplain, nobody else would live there. So it was a safe place for them to establish. So it was just a freedmen's settlement. In the 30s and 40s, it started to prosper, because if you think about it, we couldn't shop in your stores, we couldn't go to your hospitals, and so there was this really rich sense of community where everybody pulled the resources together to see that they built their own institutions. And then as they started saying, well, now that we have some wealth, we want to live where there's plumbing and running water and it doesn't flood every year. And as they started buying land or homes in that area, they bombed them. So before it was even known as Bonton, it was referenced as Bombtown after those bombings. And shortly after that, the mayor applied for a new federal program to build public housing. Dallas got some of those. 2 of them were located in Bonton, and that really set it on a real downward trajectory. It came from what the old timers will describe as a materially poor community, but rich in relationships and community and collaboration, became a community where you could lose your life by walking down the wrong street with the wrong color on.
Wow. And social ill, so you find yourself now, based upon your friend, in Bonton doing Bible studies, going down there. What prompted ultimately the move for you?
Well, the first day I went, the room was filled with about 6 or 8 guys that were all from that neighborhood that were returning home from prison. And Bonton's only 1.92 square miles, home to about 5,000 to 6,000 people. It struck, even somebody that was ignorant about all this, it struck me as odd that there were 6 men in that room that were all from that neighborhood, that were all coming home from prison at the same time. Like, I've never been around 6 people in any neighborhood that were coming home from prison at the same time. I later learned that we'll incarcerate almost 40% of our men before their 25th birthday. When you go to a place and you meet people, you haven't earned the right to know their story yet. I just get to meet you for who you are. And I met a bunch of beautiful, capable, resilient, ambitious people, and I couldn't reconcile the paradox between who I saw them to be and what they'd done. And every day we went down there, every Saturday we went down there, they would say the same thing: if we can't get a job, we're going to wind up dead or back in prison. And to me, that sounded noble and urgent. And so I started asking how I might be able to help with that. That's the one thing they told me, taught me, and the one thing that I thought I might have the ability to do something about.
So what'd you do?
Well, I started trying to figure that out. And then what I realized is that, a few months, maybe 6 months after volunteering down there, it had become the highlight of my week to go down there and meet with my friends in Bonton, which starts to beg the question of why was this so important to me? And I think when I was honest with myself, the truth is it was making me feel better about myself. Because the reality is 2 hours on a Saturday wasn't changing anything for the people that we said we cared about. And so I feel like God just spoke to me and said, look, you can't be a real friend from a distance. So if you're going to claim to be a friend, be one. And I'm like, what does that mean? And of course, he doesn't give you all the clarity and dreams with a clear picture all the time. But it's like, well, I need to be close to him. So the only way I can be close is to live there. So I started asking them, like, would you accept me if I moved here? Like, I want to be who I say I am. It's important to me to be authentic. And the only way I can be authentic in our friendship is to be present with you more than 2 hours on a Saturday. And I don't know how to do that if I don't live here.
So you, as a white person, find yourself moving to Bonton.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
It was sketchy. Those men, I'm pretty comfortable in saying that nobody wanted me in Bonton but those 6 men. So it was kind of us against the world. There was no place that I could move. Everything in Bonton's designated as low income, and I didn't qualify as low income, so I couldn't live there. The only way I got to live there is a Habitat house defaulted. And when somebody moves out of a house in Bonton, the people that are out all night every night see them move out, they'll immediately go in and rip all the copper out of the house and sell it for scrap. And then once the house is opened, it gets turned into a what they call a trap house, drug and prostitution house. And so Bill Hall, the CEO of Habitat, had gone to the city and let them know, I know one of our Habitat houses has been turned into a dope house. We're trying to do something about it, but we can't secure the house unless we have somebody willing to move into it. And it's an active dope house, so I can't find anybody that'll do it. And they said, well, this guy came up here telling us he wanted to move to Bonton, give him a call. So I moved into a trap house. And it was, every encounter of people coming that thought it was still a trap house was literally fight or flight. They would either run or it turned into an altercation for the first 3 or 4 months I was there.
So I can imagine too, the courage that it took those 6 men that you were seeding life into, the social and peer pressure from everybody else, calling them, Uncle Tom or whatever.
All of it.
To that, but you had that bond together and continuing to fight. So you're down there, you start a Bible study, you get guys, people in the community to come and, what's this white guy doing? And you slowly over time gain their confidence, their acceptance. What ultimately prompted you to start that Bonton Farms?
Well, so first of all, there was a guy that the first night I moved into Bonton, he showed up at my house drunk and high. My dad had helped me come down to move a bed into one of the bedrooms. And he shows up. I know this guy. He's one of those 6 guys, but he's really messed up this night. I'm familiar with that. So he starts giving me a hard time, which I'm fine with, but then he starts doing it to my dad. And my mind starts racing like, I'm moving here. I'm no longer coming down here on Saturdays. I've got to set boundaries up or this is going to be chaos. And one of the 3 rules that they gave me if they were going to have my back is I can't ever call the police. So I'm trying to tell Jerry, you can mess with me all you want, but leave my dad out of it. And he immediately starts in his addiction saying, what are you going to do about it? He knows I can't call the police. And I was like, I'm asking you not to. And he's like, well, you're going to have to do more than that because I'm not stopping. So wound up physically throwing him out of the house, got in an altercation. And you can't do that in Bonton because if anybody from Bonton sees me get one up on him, everybody else will do it to him. So I'm up all night thinking he's going to come back and shoot me. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, he shows up at my house crying and saying, I hate myself. I've been like this since I was 6 years old. I don't know what to do about it. I'm trapped like this and I hate myself for it. And I don't know how you heard that, but when he said 6 years old, that sounded really specific. And I couldn't get that out of my head. So I was like, what happened when you were 6? He's like, well, I was a product of a rape, but my mom wanted to have me. And I think every time she held me, she revisited that trauma. So she gave me away to a family that lived in Bonton and they took me in as their own. And when I was 6, we were in a car accident and they died and I lived. And I've just lived in the streets ever since. Been to prison 5 times. I'll snort, shoot up, drink anything I can I hate myself. And so when I would come home from work at the end of the day, he would always be waiting on my porch. He's like an old bull elk that's been ostracized from the herd. Now that he's getting older, he's like 6'5", 300 pounds. He's a big man, but he's older now. And so when kids would get off the school bus, they'd back him in a corner and throw rocks at him. So all day long, he's having this stuff happen. And when I'd come from work, he'd come broken and crying and talk to me about it. And I would listen, and then I'd open the Bible and say, this is the only place where I found answers. And when we would do that, the only white person in Bonton on a front porch stood out. So people would stop and say, what's going on here? And we'd tell them. And daily people would say, man, I wish I knew you were doing that. I needed that today. And Jerry kept challenging me, you need to open up your house. I'm telling you, people are thirsty for this. And I was so intent on wanting him to know he was special. Like, this is for us. This is our friendship. I'm not trying to be anything or draw crowds, that I didn't do it. And it kept happening and kept happening. And finally one night I just said, okay, well, tell everybody that my house is open at 6 o'clock on Wednesday and we'll see what happens. And man, before long, there were people, we had to move the furniture out. People were in the bedrooms, in the bathrooms, down the hallway, in the kitchen. The whole floor was filled with people. It was the most beautiful, crazy thing I've ever seen. But the needs are so great that, it's one thing to love somebody, but it's another thing to love them so well you care that you're willing to actually do something with them and on their behalf. And so it required an organization to form. I'd never intended that, but it required us to form a mechanism for which this work could be done through. And so Bonton Farms was born.
And you mentioned Bonton too, being the freedmen's community, but the aspect of Bonton, it's a food desert. Most people don't realize, and I know you can briefly kind of get into that, but just from a synopsis, that they have to travel by public transportation to be able to go to a grocery store, where it's an all-day journey for them to be able to do that, to come back, let alone the financial means of having to do that. They're going to a C-store, they're getting sodas, they're getting candy, they're getting stuff that's nutritionally deficient for them. So the high incidences of diabetes, of other sicknesses and diseases, that you got a large task in front of you. So was that the motivation ultimately to start Bonton Farms with the fresh produce, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, if you go back, it was the men saying we're going to be dead or in prison if we don't get a job. And so we started trying to prepare them for work. And most of them were too sick to work. To your point about being a food desert and healthcare desert, those two things combined lead to chronic illness that if you don't have your health, you can't be productive. And so once I learned about all this, it's like, well, we need to do something about it, and I have no idea what to do. So we commandeered a vacant lot next to my house because my water was on and I had a hose that would reach there, and we planted a garden, which sounds silly, but I've learned in this work, if you have the faith to take 1 foot and put it out of the boat and into the water, if you're willing to do what you can do, that's the next step, even if it's ridiculous and doesn't seem like it's enough, that is the thing that starts to open the door and God starts to multiply and manifest. And so we planted this silly little garden, the most beautiful thing out of it. Our community, there's a silly quote that says, I don't know who discovered water, but I know it wasn't a fish. And so our community was sick and dying. We have more than double the rate of cancer, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, and childhood obesity than the county we're in. And men will live 12 years less than the average lifespan in Dallas County. And we didn't know it. We thought that was normal. And so the garden opened the door for a conversation that we have agency over our health. We're not a victim of this. We don't have to be. And that was really a key unlock that started to happen. And we got written a ticket for selling vegetables, which angered me, and I went to City Hall to pick a fight. And they understood the challenges and were trying to find ways to help, and wound up giving us a city block of land on the back end of Bonton to start a real urban agricultural experiment that becomes the main thing that people probably know. If they know about Bonton Farms, that's probably the piece of land that they tie back to us.
And then, well, also, Nathan Sheets was instrumental to our friend at Nathan's Honey, and
I don't think Bonton Farms would be there if Nathan hadn't first been obedient in the part that he played.
That's awesome. And that's just, again, the body of Christ and people going. So you got this, you're seeing changes. So how many years has it been now that Bonton Farms has been up and going? And just kind of briefly talk about the impact in the community. And ultimately, I want to get to where you're now with the Stand Together Foundation and kind of what you're doing there.
Yeah, so I moved there in January 2012, and Bonton Farms was founded in 2014. So that first year and a half to 2 years was the community trying to see if they were going to embrace me or not. It was just relationship building. And we were doing some work, but it was mostly just filling each other out and earning trust. I always say that progress moves at the pace of relationships, and relationships move at the pace of trust. And trust is established when we have clear expectations of one another that each of us consistently meets. And so we were doing that. We were laying out expectations for others. We were evaluating people on whether we were meeting them. From that, trust was starting to emerge. From that trust, relationships happened, and then progress started to emerge. And that was a year and a half of it. And then Bonton Farms emerged in 2014. As you mentioned, Nathan Sheets helped us start Bonton Honey Company, which was our first opportunity to pay people to do work through that and create what we call a social enterprise. Unbeknownst to me, that when we started that farm, people that are in a concrete jungle like Dallas in a city want to come down on the weekends with their families and buy some vegetables and pet the goats and buy some fresh eggs from the chickens. And so I was like, man, we have a lot of people come into our neighborhood now that have money in their pockets, and we need to figure out a way to leave it here, get them to leave it here.
Sure.
And my friends were all like, that's what we went to prison for. I was like, no, I mean voluntarily. I mean voluntarily leave it here. And so we We developed plans to open a restaurant, and then a coffee house, and then a food preservatory, and then a farmer's market. And all of that's designed to draw people in, because I think that proximity is really important to understanding and serving your neighbor. We don't know our neighbors, and that's a big problem. And so if we know our neighbors well enough, all of a sudden the will emerges to love them well enough that we see that they live into the fullness who God created them to be. And it's an economic engine to create jobs for people that otherwise would have a hard time finding them.
So you stopped that centrifugal force of people always being kept down.
Yep.
And you gave them opportunity to learn, work ethic, life skills, develop a resume to then go out and to do it. And now, that community can thrive.
Yep.
That's the lessons you learned at Bonton. How is that translated to your Stand Together Foundation of what are you doing now?
Well, one, it's a great privilege and honor to represent Stand Together Foundation. What they've allowed me to do is, one, I get to travel all over the country now and learn from other people. So when you're immersed in trying to start up something like Bonton Farms, that's all I know. And so now the aperture is opened up, and I'm learning from people all over the country. And then secondly, I'm able to aggregate all those lessons to go help other people see the kind of change that we're seeing in Bonton. I don't know if I don't think you and I have talked since this, but in 2022, when the census data came out, our work in Bonton has led to 106% improvement in median household income in 8 years. We have the second highest teen pregnancy rate in Dallas County. 25% of all our children were born to teenage mothers. That's now down to 12.3%. Our high water high school graduation rate had been 54%. It's now 77%. Life expectancy increased 1.6 years over an 8-year period. And property crime, violent crime, and murder has been reduced by 61%. And so if we can do that in Bonton, I believe that we can show people the lessons that we learn there that can be applied so that they can see that kind of transformation in their cities.
If you could put your finger on it, what are those probably top 3 or 4 takeaways that helped in that transition? What do people need to be able to see that significance in life and make a change?
Well, I think one of it is deep relationships, deep, healthy relationships. That's the catalyst for transformation. And once you have relationships that are deep and meaningful, then you have to have the tools. I call it creating the conditions for flourishing. There's a scripture in Psalms that says, the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies proclaim his name, and day after day they pour forth speech. And if you think about it, all of creation follows God's orders perfectly, except for us. We're the one anomaly in the equation. And when he created everything, he created 2 kinds of organisms, simple organisms and complex organisms. There's one thing that delineates those 2. Every complex organism requires a healthy ecosystem to flourish. So what is an ecosystem for a person? We know what it is for a seed. A seed, by the way, is a complex organism too. If I have a seed here and sun there and water there and nitrogen here and phosphorus here and potassium over there, if those 6 things don't come together, no, that seed doesn't become plant and that plant doesn't produce fruit. It's only when those things work together. So in Bonton and places like it, if we don't have economic opportunity and jobs, if affordable housing is problematic, if transportation is a barrier and separates us from the rest of the community, if we're a food desert and don't have access to healthy food, if we don't have access to education, and if we don't have access to fair credit, those are the ecosystem. That's the ecosystem or the tools that people use to build our life with. So all of the theory of change of Bonton was we believe in people that if they were equipped and had a healthy ecosystem to flourish the way the neighborhoods do that we live in, then we believe the people will leverage those tools to build flourishing lives with, and that's what that data is showing is true.
That's awesome. So that's, gives hope to a lot of people in a lot of communities that it's not necessarily Big Brother, the government, that's going to bail you out. It's you and me. It's us together corporately.
Yeah. As a Christian, I have to say that God has one plan for his kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven, and it's for us to be that work until he comes back and sets it all straight. Nowhere is the government supposed to play that role. So if we obfuscate our responsibility to them, things are going to continue to get worse until we accept that responsibility and find our role in that story and then play it out with integrity.
You had, before we close down here and give you the opportunity for the the last word. You gave a statistic over the last years of just the amount of money that we spend as a nation to homelessness, to these social ills, but we haven't seen one statistical improvement with that. What was that?
We spend on average $1.7 trillion a year. Our defense budget, in contrast, is about 900 billion. We spend double what we spend on defense for poverty alleviation efforts, 1.7 trillion. We have over 1.5 million nonprofits in this country that now represent over 10% of all jobs in this country and 5.7% of our GDP. And yet, every social ill is getting worse. Poverty is not declining, homelessness is not declining, deaths of despair, addiction, crime, educational outcomes, health outcomes. You run the gamut, not one of them's getting better. And I don't say that to take hope out of the equation, to feel hopelessness. I say that as a call to action because the answers are within us.
Yeah, it's that old adage that on stupidity is trying to do the same thing over and over, expecting different results.
Yeah, pretty smart guy that said that too, right?
That's right. We try something new. Yeah. And I appreciate you being here, but I do want to give you the last word. The opportunity that I ask a lot of my guests is on identity. As my working definition of identity is those thoughts that you pass, your thoughts, your words, the experiences that you pass to that filter that provide that meaning, purpose, and impact. From an identity perspective, now, who can you say, who is Daron Babcock?
I'm a child of God made in his image. That's the only identity I anchor to.
And what advice or encouragement, words of encouragement, would you give to someone that like you has been struggling with that performance-based identity and is looking to how can they find that purpose and significance in life and peace in life? Because we all know there's so many people out there that are doing very well materially, socially, but internally they're struggling with anxiety and depression.
Yeah, I think it's anchoring to things that can't be taken away. Like our society and culture leads us to anchor to things that are temporal. Our identity, you see it when the stock market crashes and you have the suicide rate go up with people that are in that business because our identity is tied to what we do, not who we are. And I think it's really wrestling through individually, who are you? In Bonton, we always used to do this picture where I'd pull out $100 bill and say, like, I'm going to give this away. Who wants it? And everybody says yes. It doesn't matter if you're in Bonton, but especially in Bonton, everybody says yes. And I'm like, okay, let me tell you, has anybody here lost a loved one to addiction, or anybody had a sister or cousin or somebody trafficked in sex trafficking? And of course, in our work, everybody always says yes. Okay, I have to tell you that this $100 bill was used to buy the dope that killed your friend. This $100 bill was used to sell this person into sex slavery. Who still wants the $100 bill? People will pause and think about it, but it's still a $100 bill, right? So they're like, I do. And it's like, okay, why? Because the only thing that determines the value of that $100 bill is not what it's been through, but who created it. And who created it is the U.S. Treasury. And they say no matter what that $100 bill's done, it's still worth $100. So in your life, it's really important. The only thing that can define who you are, what your identity is who created you. None of the stuff that you do or have been through defines who you are. And if you anchor to that, it will all be taken away at some point in this lifetime. You're going to lose people. Jobs are going to come and go. Houses are going to come and go. Stock market's going up and down. All of that stuff is temporal. And if you anchor to temporal, at some point, you're going to wind up at a crisis of conscience.
That's a great mic drop moment. So Daron, appreciate you being here and sharing your story. I know it's going to have an impact.
I hope so.
And for those of you that have listened in, I hope you've enjoyed the content that you got today. If you like what you hear, follow us on social media. Go to my website, chadhennings.com, to learn more about what we're trying to accomplish through Forces of Character here. But above all else, go on and continue to be in your community and yourself to be a force of character. Take care. God bless.